Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thank you so much for that introduction and the welcome. It's always so good to be here with you all. I think the last time I was in this space was in May, and I got to sit with many of you at the fall retreat. So it's so good to see so many familiar faces. Today, I want to talk about working with our shame. And I feel like I so often come in here with unpopular topics, but they're the ones that are alive for me. So you can even notice like, oh, we're talking about shame today. Just notice how that lands in your body. It may be like, oh, I don't want to talk about that, or I don't want to look at that. If so, it'll be over soon. It's definitely a mind state I'm working with a lot right now. And so it felt like the thing I wanted to bring in today. And I know last year we talked about, I came in and talked about like making mistakes and how we meet our moments of making mistakes, and shame definitely came into that conversation. And we also talked about pleasure and how we hold our pleasure in our practice. And I think shame probably came into that conversation too. So today I'm like, let's just like get into it. Let's just talk about shame. And it is such, I notice in myself, it's such a powerful unconscious force in my life, or it has been often in my life. I've, over the last number of years, maybe the last 5 years or so, been really intentionally, consciously working with how shame arises in my body, mind. And a lot of that's been because of the work I do as a restorative justice facilitator. Shame comes up always when I'm working with folks around sexual harm and trauma. Whether you've been harmed, whether you've caused harm, shame is a huge part of the healing process. Like really working with how our shame is, in particular around this topic of sexual trauma, it is always there. And so I've been like, well, let me really look at how this shows up in my own life. Let me learn as much as I can around shame just through how it shows up. And I felt like as I was, coming into the restorative justice work and learning, I had the opportunity to go and work with men who've caused sexual harm in prison, in some prison programs. And that was like a master class in shame. I remember once going into one of the programs, and one of the guys inside who'd been working his program for quite a while, like just gave us this class about his own journey from shame to self-worth and all the things he'd learned along the way. And I was like, wow, I am like these guys are like master teachers in this. Well, how lucky am I to get to come and learn from them, because they've been on such a journey around it. So I've really it's really been something that I've been working with consciously in my own practice. And I also feel like in this moment in this country, as we're seeing our government move towards strategies of fascism and totalitarianism, we don't talk about shame, but I think I feel motivated to be working consciously with my own shame, because I think it can be a place where we can be controlled. by our own wanting to avoid shame, or the ways that shame shows up and we move into fear, or we move into anger or hatred. Shame is like this key emotion. It's one of the what I've learned is like the five primary or universal emotions. If we look across all cultures, there's five emotions: joy, fear, anger, grief, and shame, that kind of show up wherever any culture that you go to. And then there's all kinds of emotions that kind of nest underneath those five primary ones. So it could be like annoyance is kind of under anger, or melancholy is under sadness. There's all of these nuances, but there's kind of these five big emotions. And of those, shame in some ways, like it's such a powerful and visceral and uncomfortable emotion that it can also be very connected with these other, particularly fear and anger, can kind of come out of our experience of shame, some often unconsciously. So I know I am motivated to be as free as possible, especially now. I want to be someone who cannot be controlled. And for that reason, like I want to really be consciously working with these powerful emotions like shame, fear, and anger, so that I cannot be coerced, if that makes sense, or I cannot be manipulated, because I'm in a conscious relationship with these powerful emotions. So for me, that's part of why it's part of my practice, because my practice is to become free. And like I can do that through sitting and observing, but in some ways it is in our big emotions and in the ways that we make choices and take action, get motivated by these big emotions, that is where we're often limited, where we're not free because we're acting out of old patterning. So that's, I often, when I come, I talk about these difficult emotions because they're so much a part of my own path of freedom. And I think another piece that motivates me to talk about it right now is to see how our government is attacking specifically trans people in this moment. So it's like, why is this happening? And I think as we think back, for those of us who are alive in the 80s, this playbook, quote unquote, can look quite familiar to the time when gay people were being attacked, when people with AIDS were being attacked by our government and by figures like Anita Bryant. This is like a very familiar pattern, that there is some group of people that it's okay to attack. And in the 80s, that was gay or queer people, people with AIDS. And in some ways, like shame takes a piece in that. Who is got shame attached to them so that we can just say, those people are bad. Those people should not be cared for. Those people are not deserving of basic care, healthcare rights. And in this moment, it seems like trans people and immigrants in particular are the groups of people that it's okay to still say these people are bad, these people are not deserving of basic care and rights. And so then it's another place where it's like, is this in some way like motivated by the shame within our culture that's not talked about? Is people's shame like a part of why they go along with this? So I'm just sort of curious, and it's a part of why this topic of shame is present for me. And just as we're talking about it, I just invite us to keep coming back to the body, keep coming back to like, how does it feel right now? And what do you notice in the body? Because that's like such a good place to, I know when I'm at all in the field of shame, like it might turn up as like a feeling of hotness in my belly, or it might turn up as a sinking feeling, or it might turn up as just wanting to disappear, like a kind of a compression. So we can just notice if any of those things are showing up, or if any of the ways that you notice shame shows up in your body is present as we're talking about it. So I just want to say a little bit like, what is this shame? And a little bit about what can we find in the teachings of the Buddha about shame? And like I often think, what is this and what is the opposite? So like an opposite of shame would be like healthy self-regard, healthy self-esteem, like just a sense of warmth and like positive regard towards the self or others. And there's a quote from a therapist named Terrence Real, I think, that felt very relevant to this. He said, healthy self-esteem is the capacity, rarely taught in our culture, to hold oneself in warm regard, even when colliding with one's human shortcomings. So even in those moments when we make mistakes, we're still holding ourselves in this warm self-regard. Our capacity to stay rooted in a compassionate understanding of one another's flaws keeps us humane. When we lose touch with our own frailties, we become judgmental and dangerous to others. That for me very much resonated with this political moment. The ways that when we turn away from our own humanness, including our human flaws, we can become dangerous to others, sometimes even violent. So yeah, and so as like free people, I want to like say, how can I be the most free that I can be without impinging on the freedoms of others, without taking away the freedoms of others? Like that's the freedom that I am, we talk a lot about freedom, and that's the freedom that I aspire to. And then I like to bring in Brené Brown, who's a real expert on shame, if folks are familiar with her work. And she distinguishes between shame and guilt, and there's also a very helpful way to understand shame. So, well, first just starting out with how she defines shame. She says, it's a fundamental belief that there is something within you that is flawed, that you are wrong. So this like fundamental belief, like I am bad, I am wrong, I am flawed. And then she distinguishes that when we are feeling shame, it is this focus on the self, this I am bad. And then guilt, on the other hand, is a focus on behavior. So I have done something bad or that's had an impact on someone. So just distinguishing between those two things, this shame, I am bad, and the guilt, which is I've done something, that I want to address, or I want to apologize for, I want to make amends for. It's about our actions, both our actions that might have impacted someone and our actions that we can take to address that. And so just to say, like, when we're in that place of I am bad, there's kind of nothing you can do. Like, you're bad. But if you're focused on behavior, then, there is something there is some action I can take. That can be a motivator for change. Guilt can actually be motivating. Though it also is very uncomfortable. And in some, depending on what kind of family you grew up in, you may have experienced guilt, like someone kind of putting a lot of guilt on you. And so it may have, may be more complicated. So I want to say I'm making it simple, and it's not quite that simple. If we had, a parent who always made us feel guilty for not spending time with them or something, we may actually be in some kind of mix of guilt and shame. And so the Buddha actually also pointed to some of this distinction. One place that shame shows up in the teachings of the Buddha is in what are called the 8 worldly winds. So it's speaking to these kind of conditions that change, that are out of our control. So the 8 worldly winds are in 4 pairs: gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, pleasure and pain. So just these winds are something that can blow us around. And as a part of that, this one that's praise and blame is kind of where shame shows up. Though the Buddha didn't talk so directly about shame, and I'm not even sure shame in the Buddha's time was quite as shows up quite the way that it does in our time, as we are so like shaped by Christianity and like religion and culture that holds shame as such a central kind of dynamic. So anyway, this praise and blame, if we just think of that internally, it's like, I am good, I am bad, and being caught in that, or be receiving from others praise or criticism and what might arise from that. And then the other thing that the Buddha talked about were these 2 qualities that he called the guardians of the world. And the Pali words are hiri and otipa. So it's Hiri, hiri, and otapa, Ottappa. And hiri is like a sense of like our morality, our moral compass, and that we have a understanding of what's right and wrong, that we are, in ways like that we care about our morality and ethics. So that's, the Buddha said, this is a positive quality, this kind of moral compass. And then the other one, otapa, is usually translated as moral fear, or the fear of causing harm, the fear that we might like do something that impacts somebody. So it's usually called moral fear or scrupulousness. And essentially it's kind of like that we care about how we impact others. And so that one actually kind of tracks on the way that Brené Brown is talking about guilt. Very similar to what the Buddha is talking about with this quality of ottappa. And and that these qualities, though they may be uncomfortable, are helping like direct us towards ethical behavior, and that's a positive thing. And so I think that just this distinction between guilt and shame can be so helpful in a moment, maybe when shame arises, if we made a mistake, we can look at this and just examine like, like, what am I feeling? But also like, what are these thoughts? Is it, I am bad? Or is it, oh, I did something that I did not want to do and I want to do something corrective? So just like making that, that distinction can be so helpful. And I want to talk a little bit more about how shame works, and then we'll get into this piece of like, how do we actually parse and work with it as it comes up in the moment. But I want to bring in one other tool that's been really helpful to me in kind of understanding how shame works in the body, or how it works in my like in my reactions, in my in these moments when shame might arise, and things often cascade very quickly. So this tool, which is called the compass of shame, helps me understand what's happening in those moments, sometimes that go by very quickly. So this is from someone named D.L. Nathanson, who worked on shame, and he created this compass. So it's like 2 axes. And what he is pointing to is the ways that we can have different strategies to protect ourselves, essentially, when shame arises. Because shame is really one of the most uncomfortable states. So on one axis, he points out that when shame arises, sometimes we attack ourselves and sometimes we attack others. So that's one. So on the top, it would be attack self, and on the bottom, attack others. If you imagine a compass, like north, south, east, west. And then on the other axis, one side he calls withdrawal, and the other side he calls avoidance. So if we just have these four, attack self, attack other, withdrawal, and avoidance, one thing is each of these is an internal versus external reaction. So attack self is internal, attack others is external. Withdrawal is also internal. It's a let me remove myself from this experience or any situation in which shame might arise, while avoidance is like, let me just pretend it's not happening. So the withdrawal is more internal and the avoidance is more external. So I'll just give examples for all four of these. So if I imagine that, I came in and you were sitting at the, taking your shoes off and I stepped on your foot, I might feel embarrassment or shame. And in that moment, even before the feeling, one of these strategies might arise. So I'm actually like primarily an attack self shame person at this point in my life. I'm immediately like, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible person. So the first thing might be like this stabbing. Oh, I'm a terrible person. I just stepped on your foot. And I might apologize, like over apologize. On the other hand, if I were an attack other, I would be like, why were you sitting there? Like, what's wrong with you? What were you doing there? Like, you are in the way. So that would be like attack other. So I'm not feeling the shame. I'm putting it all onto the other person. And then on the other dimension, if I were on the withdrawal side, I would be like, next time I shouldn't even take my shoes off here. I should go over there and take my shoes off over there. Or I shouldn't come here at all. Like withdrawal is like, I'm going to remove myself from any situation where I might feel shame. And then avoidance would be like, it didn't even happen. I might be like, oh, there's cookies. Or I might be like, oh, look at that cute guy. Or, I might just like, I'm going to distract myself and ignore that I just stepped on your foot. And in that case, also, I'm like, in both of these external strategies, we can notice it's actually, you don't even have to feel the shame. If you attack others, you can push it right off on someone else. And if you do an avoidance strategy, you can be like, I'm going to go find something pleasurable and not even feel the shame. So it's just interesting to notice that there's all of these strategies, and we may have a particular go-to strategy within them. And we may, we're always interacting with other people, and we may notice that the people in our lives have a go-to strategy as well. Or we may think of our parents and think, oh, this person had a go-to strategy. So I can like think of my father, and he was like an attack other. It would be immediately like, what are you doing? If something came up for him. And I can understand through his life story as someone who was bullied as a kid and really developed like a very aggressive strategy to make sure that never happened to him again. I can see why and actually have a lot of compassion for why he would have an attack other strategy. Like that was a really, at some point in his life when he was a kid, that was like the best strategy for him to survive. And then for me, as someone with an attack self strategy, there was a time in my life as a kid when I was like, I grew up with an experience of a lot of neglect, when it was actually easier for me to believe there was something wrong with me that I had to fix than to confront that I was, in the care of humans who really couldn't take care of me. Like that was a much more frightening alternative than that, oh, there's something wrong with me. And if I could just fix it, these people will take care of me. And I can have a lot of compassion for that kid who really had to believe there was something wrong with me in order to survive. And in all of these strategies are something that we're just doing the best to survive at some point in our lives. And now it's what we might call a maladaptive strategy. Now for me to attack myself is not helpful, as an adult. It keeps me in a lot of cycles of shame and really negative stories about myself that actually aren't helping me be in the relationships I want to be in. So with all of these, just understanding these strategies for me helps me have compassion for myself. And it also helps me have compassion for the people around me, even in moments when they might be doing something that hurts. So you can kind of think of in our own close relationships, if any of these, strategies show up. And sometimes they can, I can notice as someone who tends to turn on myself, that in some ways it's easy sometimes to be in intimate relationships with people who are a more attack other strategy because we're all in agreement that I'm the problem. Which creates a certain needs. Anyway, just an insight I've been sitting with lately. So yeah, all of just having this model, which, simplifies and probably oversimplifies some of these things. It's just helpful to me as I navigate my own shame. And even as I look at what's happening in the world, I can be like, oh, we don't need to have compassion for the people who are, oppressing us right now, but having some understanding sometimes helps me to be like, oh, person is really doing the strategy that they learned to do. And we still need to fight against it. We still need to have our boundaries, but we can say that makes sense out of what their experience was. And then also we can employ multiple strategies. So we could attack self and withdraw, or we could attack others and avoid or distract, or any other combinations. So I just want to share also just a little bit about some of the strategies I've been working with as I've been in some years of working with this quality of shame. Just share a few practices. And the first one for me in any moment where I notice shame arising is just to pause and take a breath, and then maybe take a couple more breaths. And just, to whatever extent, really notice what my sensations are, to really start at the level of the body and sensation before even labeling it. Just oh, what's happening here at the sensation level? And often with shame, there's a lot of sensation. Or there might be no sensation. And I think, so it's just the noticing. And then I also like to kind of listen, is there a message here? Is there a story here? What can I listen for in this experience? As I was saying before, there might be a message that I am bad, or there might be a message that I did something wrong. And so I can just notice that piece, because that's if it's that I am bad, it's I want to spend some time bringing compassion to that part of myself that believes that. Or if there's this, I did something, then I might also want to turn to take some action that might be oh, I want to apologize, or I want to address in some way something that I did. So that's kind of a key thing that I want to notice in that moment is is this me just sitting with my old stories, or is this something, behavior or something in a relationship that I want to address? And then if it is about something, a behavior, an action, then I might want to, have a conversation. I might want to ask more questions. And that really is like related to when I was here sharing about mistakes. So I think there's more there if you want to go back to that talk around like, oh, here's some specific steps to take if we want to apologize or be accountable. And then if it is really this piece of like this, I am bad, these beliefs, one piece I want to do is just bring compassion to that part of myself that believes that and know that that part of myself is doing its best to take care of me, but not in a way that really is helpful now. But still to like have the compassion and the even gratitude for that part of myself that kept me alive. And then I like to bring in some questions. One set of questions that has been really helpful to me, if folks are familiar with Byron Katie, something she calls the work. It starts with these 4 liberating questions. And I really just work with the first 2, but I'll share all 4. She says, is it true? So something can have some internal message. We just ask, is this true? And often like the immediate answer is yes. Because some part of ourselves believes it so strongly. And so then she asks, can you absolutely know that it is true? So kind of like, let's take another pause. Like, how do you know it's true? Or can I absolutely know that it's true? And at that one, for me, there's often a like, oh, I don't know. And even getting to I don't know is so good. And when we're working with these parts, I don't ever try to say to that inner voice, you're wrong. Because it just is like, that part of myself is not going to be convinced any more than someone, you talk to is going to be convinced when you say you're wrong. Like that's just never a convincing strategy. But to just get to I don't know, like actually I don't know that absolutely know that this is true, is like space. It's just like creating some space. And then her other 2 questions are, how do you react when you believe that thought? So just to like notice, oh, how does it feel when I believe this I am bad? You just notice, oh, it feels terrible. Feels so terrible. And then she asks, who would you be without the thought? And so it's also just kind of like another place to put some space in. Like, who would I be if I didn't believe I was bad? It's also kind of an I don't know place, but also a place of possibility. So love these questions. Is it true? Can you absolutely know that it's true? How do you react when you believe that thought? And who would you be without the thought? So these are all just great questions. And another question that I love to bring in with shame especially is this mine? And I just ask, is this mine? Like, does this belong to me? And very often the answer is no. Like, this is not mine. I don't even know where it came from. Or this is clearly my mother's. Or maybe this is from my grandparents. Or maybe this is from the culture. Like, that's just always a really rich question for me. Is this mine? So just bringing in questions. And then the other one that this is kind of like after doing some self-inquiry, I like to share with someone else. So for a while, I worked with this practice that I called shame report. And when I experience shame, I have this one friend we share on Marco Polo, which is just like this video messaging app. And I would just send a Marco Polo, like, here's my shame report. And tell the story. And I just always would feel better after doing that. And then my friend would share shame reports with me, and I always loved them. I'm like, this is so good. And then it reminds me that someone else actually wants to hear my shame report, because there can be like a story like, I don't want to share this. No one wants to hear this, but that is not true. Shame reports are good stuff. They're always good stories. So you can think of, I'm going to do a little mini podcast, my shame report for a friend, and know that your friend's going to be entertained. And Brene Brown says, shame derives its power from being unspeakable. So when we speak out of that place, we're actually taking away the power of shame. And and I just always notice inside myself a shift every time I tell another person what I've experienced when I'm in that space of shame. So those are some of my strategies in working with shame. And I'm curious, just, for you all, like, are there ways that you work with shame in your life or your practice? Are there strategies that you've found that really work in those moments? So yeah, I'm curious just to open up a little conversation before we end. Yes.
Yeah, for years and years and years, I've always used this term, internalized homophobia.
Mhm.
And now that, I've been thinking about it and thinking, when I've experienced that, when was it anything but shame? that I was feeling? And so I think from now on, I'm just gonna,
Yeah.
just put, I'm feeling, it's that shame, same with internalized homophobia. It's this feeling that has been foisted on you, that you've
Mhm.
accepted, but I think shame is like, for me, more on the nose.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it just kind of gets back to this observation I've been sitting with lately about, like, how does our personal shame story interact with the cultural shame story? And that there are these places where we've been very trained, not just in our families, but by the culture, to bring shame to ourselves, and I think it's a real act of resistance to, like, to work with that and release what we can release of the stuff that's not ours, and then kind of be with the part that is ours. Yeah. Yeah, other folks.
Some people online.
Yeah, let's go to someone online if there is. We got a couple hands. So maybe we'll do one online and then one in the room.
I could. Oh. So thank you. I really, that resonated with me a lot. And so I really appreciate, especially the questions. Yeah, my comment and my question is, and being, given this is a gay Buddhist fellowship. Just a quick example. My question is around timing and how to become skillful in using these questions to prevent moving into behaviors that are not healthy. So I could leave it that general, or I could, put it in a more specific context. But I'll try to do the specific context is, like, I was in a loving kindness yesterday, Zoom call, and I felt so great and grounded afterwards. And I had this really positive, loving, I was in a very spacious conversation with my boyfriend. And it felt really good. And then I had work to do. I was working on a job application. And then some of the, like, negative talk was, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm an imposter. I shouldn't be applying, blah, blah, blah. And then what I do is then I internalize, and then I would go online, and then, I'm putting myself at risk for doing something already, that causes guilt and shame. So my question is, how can we become, or how can I become more skillful in that moment where I came from a really loving, self-compassionate place? And all, it's a repeated thing. And I wish, in terms of change, I could learn to observe it and stop it before I go down that road too far. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That resonates a lot with me. Yeah. And I want to invite you to like also feel into how is it just to share that with all of us in this moment.
Yeah.
Is there anything you notice having just shared that?
Yeah, it's well, I feel my heart is open. I'm feeling vulnerable. I think I am feeling maybe a little bit of shame. And I also am feeling like my heart is beating very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to like point to the part where you, out of this experience, also shared it with us. And like, yeah, that's a brave and vulnerable step. And is one of the things that can disrupt us, like going from that experience of shame straight into maybe the distraction or the avoidance, or even that attack on self, like if we're using the compass, there was some attack on self that was there as well as some avoidance. And, I think when I first started working with shame, I really had more of an avoidance strategy of like sometimes I'd be like, I don't really feel shame that much. But it was because I was skipping over it and going straight to some distraction. And so part of my practice was like, actually, can I stay in that experience of shame a little longer and build my capacity to be with it before moving away from it?
Yeah.
And so that was that was a big reason I started doing the shame reports, is because I was having trouble even remembering my moments of shame. But if I reported it to someone else, I could hold on to it a little longer. So yeah, even this like sharing it with someone else is such a disruption of the pattern. And then another one is just kind of like, taking those breaths. And I often think of like, can I just bring warmth and curiosity to this moment? Because that's very much the opposite of that contracted experience of shame and that like turning on the self. It's just to be like, can I just be warm and curious towards myself? And like hold that, almost like the shame part that's attacking me is like a little kid that I can just kind of like hug,
Yeah, not judge it.
Yeah, just like, what am I just holding this little kid on my lap? I don't have to say anything. Just be like, let's just hang out together in this moment in a way that's warm and curious and open. So kind of invoking a bigger self to hold that maybe younger self with that warmth of positive self-regard. They can both be there. That's the thing I'm also noticing in my practice, is it can all be there at once. The positive set of self-regard, that metta, that heart you were talking about. Oh, there's so much, you're in this place of this loving heart practice, and the shame is arising. And that doesn't mean it's not working. It actually might mean that it is working, that it's a lot more space for that part of yourself to come forward and be like, I'm here and I need love too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the wounded part of myself that doing this to myself. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah. There's a hand in the back.
Yeah.
Oh, two hands.
René, you mentioned like two opposite strategies: attack self, attack other. And as you were saying that, it occurred to me that there's this other thing I experienced that really annoys me, and they're not, the person's not actually attacking me. But it's like the non-apology apology, where you're justifying or excusing or something like that. Like something was agreed upon, supposed to happen, and didn't, and then it's like, well, there were too many text messages flying back and forth, and I got confused. Or, it's like, wait, this is very clear. And so maybe that's like a third one. It's sort of like the avoidance, but not just outright. I don't, I'm distracted.
Sounds like a combo plate. Yeah, they definitely combine.
Yeah.
And that sounds right on. Yeah. Marco?
Well, for right now, a clear example of change. Right now, it means my hands are sweating
Yeah.
for the fact of talking in front of people and English that means so educated and proper. And I think in my life, I've been in a pursuit of perfectionist. And at a young age, I think I learned to be seen. You need to study a lot. So I've been studying a lot back in my country.
Yeah.
And then now here, I work in healthcare, and to start over in a different country in the US is very difficult for healthcare, which I already accomplished. And now that I have this new position on my work and all that, I want to be so perfect, and it gives me a lot of anxiety not being there. And I have a lot of problems to sleep and always thinking, how can I be better?
Yeah.
I'm always pursuing something and pushing myself to the limit. And with this stress and this anxiety that doesn't let me sleep and sleep 2-3 hours. So I think this topic that you brought, thank you so much for bringing that, because it's just perfect right now what is happening in my life. And I didn't see it this way. I thought it was my ego.
Yeah.
But it's not my ego, it's just this shame of not being perfect.
Yeah.
And I just realizing a lot of things right now. So thank you very much for bringing this.
Thank you. Yeah, for bringing that in. The perfectionism is like this way, one that we receive from the culture, like, oh, you're shameful if you don't show up this way. And more so if we're in certain identities, like we're people of color or immigrants or women or whatever it may be, like the bar is even higher for that perfectionism. And so, yeah, just like it's also this place of like, is this mine? And even if it's such a real force, even to just get that space, like part of it is just like, I don't need to identify with this, even though it's still here. Can I just get a little space to be like, this is not mine, even though I deal with this and it's a very real force in my life. The time is moving along. Okay. Yes.
Richard?
Yes, I just attended a Sex Addicts Anonymous 12-step retreat this last weekend. And one of the workshops I went to was involving thought life. What's our inner talk radio? And talking about things like feeling I messed up, or I'm a mistake, or I'm there's something wrong with me. One of the questions to help reframe those thoughts was in the context of a 12-step program was, what would a supportive, caring higher power view this? How would they view this situation? And another would be, if I say this to a friend, how would they view this situation? Like you said, sharing. And there was a really helpful workshop, and then to think about, how we can rewrite those inner thoughts, to embrace that inner child and rewrite those thoughts to be supportive of ourselves. And it was a really effective and helpful workshop that's very much along the lines of what you've been talking about. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Richard, for sharing that. That sounds so good. And I appreciate the questions, like that one, like, yeah, how would a friend react? How would that like caring higher power or inner parent react? And invoking that more spacious self. Beautiful. We're gonna have to wrap up. I'm sorry not to be able to answer all the questions, but I'll be here after we dedicate the merit. I'm gonna check in and see if there's any announcements.